Tuesday, 17th January was to be my last day at 4 Temple Road. I had breakfast and later lunch, so it was now clear that I was not on hunger strike, and the loyal steward was very much relieved. I was able to get back to work on my book, and I started working on the 4th chapter. At 7 o'clock in the evening, I took in the news on the radio, after which I was just getting ready to go down for supper when an NSO officer knocked at my bedroom door. On opening the door, I saw that 2 armed mobile policemen accompanied him. He said he had been asked to invite me to their headquarters. I confirmed that it was NSO headquarters at Awolowo Road. I dressed up and was just about to follow him downstairs when it occurred to me that it was just possible that I might not return to the house that night. So I asked, "Are we coming back here tonight, or should I take an overnight kit, pajamas, toothbrush, toothpaste, etc.? "If you like," he replied. So I got a few things together in a toilet kit and a small holder which had been brought to me at Bonny Camp. We were again ready to set off when another idea struck me, and I said, "Actually, I don't have much. Perhaps I should take all my things. What do you think?" His reply again was, "It's okay if you like." So I picked up my briefcase and a small suitcase which I also had with me, packed all my things, and we set off. I sat in the back of a Peugeot 504 saloon car with the NSO officer, while an armed mobile policeman sat in front with the driver. Another car with armed mobile policemen followed us. We drove off and soon turned into Osborne Road. Going down Osborne Road towards the mainland, I expected us to veer left on the overhead bridge and come down at Molonu Street into Obalende Road and thence via St. Gregory Road to Awolowo Road, but we did not turn off. We continued down towards Adeniji Adeli Road, at which point I then asked whether we were no longer going to NSO headquarters at Awolowo Road. His answer, "We are not going directly there exactly right now." I lit a cigarette. We drove on via Kata Bridge to Ido and left towards Ijora, whereupon I concluded that we were heading for Kirikiri. Although I had never been to Kirikiri, I had a vague idea of its general direction. We drove on through Apapa and Tinkan Island area, and I expected that we would turn off left somewhere towards Kirikiri, but we did no such thing. We continued towards Badagry Road and actually turned into Badagry Road, heading towards Badagry. I was now as confused as ever and had no idea to where I was being taken. I lit another cigarette. The officer in surprise told me that he did not know that I smoked. I confirmed that I had not in fact done so for about 12 years and only revived the habit at Bonny Camp about a week before. I had hardly finished answering the question and explaining that I was never a heavy smoker, that even then I smoked only a few sticks a day, when we turned off Badagry Road again, and in a few minutes we were right in front of Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison. He handed me over to the prison authorities and presented some papers to them which they signed. He left without as much as saying goodbye. I said to myself, "Kirikiri, here I come." I had not until 17th January 1984 ever seen the inside of a prison. Actually, the closest I recall coming to even the outside of a prison was driving past the main entrance to Enugu prisons on Okpara Avenue on several occasions. I had never even seen the main entrance to Ekueme prisons, which was barely 200 meters from my office at Awolowo Road when I was in architectural practice, and some 300 meters to the main gate of State House, Ribadu Road, where I worked for over 4 years. I had to participate in consideration of the capital votes for 43 new prisons then under construction throughout Nigeria. Although successive ministers of internal affairs pleaded acute congestion in the existing prisons, I had often wondered why Nigeria needed so many prisons. Also, whenever the recurrent budget for prisons were considered in council, I had always been vociferous in attacking the provision of 3 naira a day for feeding each prisoner, which I considered too high. My simple logic was that if under our minimum wage legislation, a full-time worker could earn as little as 125 naira per month with which to look after himself and his family, there could be no economic or moral justification for spending 90 naira per month, or approximately 3/4 of the gross minimum wage, in feeding a common criminal. My argument made, sound common sense to me and others. Little did I realize at the time that it was not all persons who found themselves in our prisons who were criminals. Many had only been charged and were awaiting trial. They were therefore presumed innocent until convicted. Under the new dispensation, many more would now find themselves in prison, even without the benefit of having been charged for any offense known to law. Our approach to the main entrance to Kirikiri Maximum had been as foreboding as the atmosphere inside. Even within the offices was stifling, suffocating, and repressive. I was immediately taken to the records office, which was in the charge of a tall, handsome assistant chief warder. He sent word to the assistant commissioner of prisons in charge, ACP, who I discovered later was actually a chief superintendent of prisons, a Mr. Mosidi, who had been called to Nigerian bar in 1978 after a session at the Nigerian Law School. He was in the same law school with our erstwhile Minister of Health, Mr. D.C. Ugu, who was to be one of the charges for a few months. The records officer took over my briefcase, my small suitcase, and my holder and asked me to produce all money in my possession. He dutifully counted the money, which was just under 1,000 naira, and entered it in his record book against my name. He explained that I would not be allowed to keep any pen, paper, or other writing material in the cell. I could take some reading material, but no newspapers or magazines. As I could also not carry any of my pieces of luggage into the cell, he advised I should take out all items which I would require for everyday use. I did not need to take more than 2 changes of clothes, as I could always have access on request to my property in the records store. The mere mention of the word cell conjured up all sorts of morbid feelings in my mind and sent my head reeling. The chief must have noticed the look of worry or alarm on my face, so he assured me that the cell was not so bad and that I would at least have a bed to sleep on, which was more that could be said for the regular inmates. Although he hoped that I would not, like Mr. Jim Nwobodo, former governor of Anambra State, who had been taken in a few days earlier, ask him if the cell was air-conditioned. The ACP soon came and instructed some of the warders to go to the cell and ensure that everything was ready for me, and to come back to report accordingly. Meanwhile, we went over from the records section where he met me to his office. I found him quite articulate and apparently well educated beyond what I would expect of prison officials. I asked him what the routine was in the cell and whether I would actually be locked up in the cell. He confirmed that he had no option but to lock up each individual cell at lockup time. The entire sequence of events looked like one big practical joke, a dream far removed from reality. And yet the entire drama was unfolding by the minute and was as real as the fact that I was now before the ACP of Kirikiri Maximum discussing the prospects of my confinement in a cell. It was incredible. I mentioned the matter of my claustrophobic propensities to the ACP and suggested half-threatening that it might not be wise for him to leave my cell door unlocked if he expected me to find me alive the following morning. While he appreciated my anxiety, he politely explained that he had to comply with prison regulations which he could not alter without instructions from higher quarters and/or the written authorization of a medical doctor. He expected the doctor to visit us the following morning, and he suggested I raise the matter with the doctor. Soon, a warder came to report that my cell was ready, and Mosidi took me across. The cell to which I was consigned was on the first floor and the first cell on the right-hand side of the central corridor. It was numbered 2, and I wondered if this was a morbid mischief or pilot-style humor. As I already knew that Shagari had been moved to Sokoto, I wondered who occupied cell number 1. After I settled in, Mosidi explained that the bathroom and toilets were at the far end of the corridor, that is, in addition to the bucket toilets located in the cell itself. I asked to be shown these facilities so as to give me a chance of walking down the corridor to see who and who were already in detention. As we walked down, I found that I had to keep my face straight down the corridor, not looking to the left or right, so that instead of my actual surveying who and who were there, the trip down the aisle only served to announce my arrival to those of the detainees who were still awake. The cell doors had apparently been locked much earlier on, and most of the detainees were already in bed, but I could not help noticing a large chunk of Ibrahim Tahir as he stood leaning against his metal cell door and saying some prayers and counting his prayer beads. It was a pity in a way that I announced my arrival at Kirikiri, as quite a few of the detainees confessed the following morning that they had not been able to sleep all night after seeing me. Some actually came to weep in my cell as soon as the cell doors were opened up the following morning. Whereas they had hitherto been optimistic that the detention would be short-lived, my participation in it and in Kirikiri did suggest to them that the government had probably been derailed and that it might all be a long drawn-out affair. Back to my cell, I warned Mosidi that if he locked the cell door before leaving, he should be prepared to accept responsibility for whatever he found in the morning. As I was alone in the cell and the other detainees were 3 or 4 to a cell, he must have taken my threat seriously. I assured him that if he did not lock the cell door but only kept it closed, I would in return give him the assurance that I would not touch the door, let alone open it throughout the night, and that nobody else needed to or would know that the door had not been locked. It was only a matter of my psychological reaction to a locked cell. He finally agreed to keep the door unlocked on the promise that I would take up the matter with the doctor the next morning. The next morning, I dutifully raised the matter with the doctor, who had apparently been briefed by Mosidi himself. The doctor gave covering approval to Mosidi's arrangement, and so it was that for my first 8 nights in Kirikiri, my cell was the only one of the detainee cells which was, by order, not locked up every evening, and yet none of the inmates knew this fact, because I never as much as touched the door, not to talk of opening it. Even when I had the need to use the toilet facilities after lockup time, I was obliged to use the buckets in my cell rather than to take advantage of the open door to use the general toilets. The detainees' block of cells was on the southern block of 2 buildings located in an extra maximum security complex within Kirikiri Maximum. To reach these blocks from the main entrance to the prison above, which were located the administrative offices, one would have to traverse almost the entire prison complex, past the hospital block, the playing field, the classroom, assembly, chapel block, the workshops and stores, the kitchens and the other prisoner cells, and the water wells. Each unit of the identical pair of building was on 2 floors and constructed in reinforced concrete. Floor, walls, roof and all. The 2 buildings were joined at front and rear by solid reinforced concrete walls about 2 meters high to form a courtyard between the 2 blocks. The main entrance gate to this complex was located in the middle of the front wall linking the 2 buildings. On entering into this courtyard, one would need to turn to the right to reach the block to the north occupied by men charged with armed robbery, mostly awaiting trial, and left to reach the block to the south now occupied by us detainees. Until the day before my arrival, the ground floor of this southern block was also occupied by armed robbers who had only been moved in the morning of the same day that I was brought in. This ground floor area had been washed and painted the same day in readiness for more detainees who were expected. To enter each building, one had to pass through a steel gate which led on to a stair lobby. From this lobby, one could either turn into the ground floor corridor leading to the cells. This corridor was also cut off by yet another metal gate, or proceed upstairs to another stair lobby from which one could then turn into the first floor corridor leading to the detainees' cells. A metal gate also secured this corridor like the one downstairs. Each floor had 19 cells, 10 to the courtyard side of the corridor and 9 to the exterior side. At the end of the corridors, there were 3 toilets on the courtyard side and an open bathroom area to the external side. Each cell was about 2.5 meters wide, 2.7 meters deep, and 3 meters high. The only openings were a steel cell door on the corridor wall and 2 courses of open reinforced concrete block walling directly under the reinforced concrete suspended floor slabs or roof, and a window opening 0.8 meters square on the external wall. There were no windows, and the window opening was protected by 25 mm diameter rods built into the reinforced concrete window sill and held at 150 millimeters centers. Although the window opening was shaded somewhat by a reinforced concrete hood, it was not possible to keep out the sun at certain hours of the day or to keep out water from the cells whenever there was driving rain. Yet this was said to be one of the more modern prison designs available to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. From the above description, it is easy to see that in order to gain access into a detainee's cell from the outside and vice versa between 7:30 p.m. and 7:30 a.m., a visitor would have to pass through 2 main entrance gates, walk about 200 meters, then pass through a courtyard gate, a building entrance gate, a corridor gate before reaching the cell door, 6 gates in all. As each of these gates was secured by several locks, the number of separate keys required could well be more than 20. And whereas the warders on night duty had the keys to the cells, the keys to the cell corridors were deposited at the main office every night and brought back in the morning. According to reports, even in cases of emergency, it had sometimes taken as long as 1 hour to open the corridor gates. It is no wonder then that the complex is referred to as the extra maximum security wing. The joke was not lost on some of us that the authorities must have intended, in their conception and appreciation of the situation, that this complex should be reserved for 2 classes of robbers: the armed robbers in the block to the north and the political and pen robbers in the block to the south. As early as 5:30 a.m., I was woken up after my first night in Kirikiri by our neighbors, the men being held for armed robbery. By the time I came in the previous night, they had turned in for the night. I had always prided myself in my ability to sleep like a log, even in the marketplace, and I used to tell my family by way of a joke that any day I went to bed and could not sleep, they should contact the priests and get ready to toll the bell. Now, perhaps for the first time, I lay down on the bed tossing for some hours instead of a few minutes before falling asleep. Ironically, there was nobody to summon the priests. Worse still, there was no priest to be summoned. And within less than 3 hours, I was wide awakened to hail Jehovah, praise the Lord, coming from different cells in the adjacent block, and followed by several Pentecostal church choruses coming in rapid succession. Sometimes 3 different choruses would be started simultaneously, but somehow after a while the weaker choruses faded out and all coalesced into the stronger chorus. These choruses went on from about 5:30 a.m. to 7 a.m. until daybreak proper. Sometimes, if one happened to get up early enough, one would hear in the distance, coming from the direction of the regular prisoners' cell to the south, the musings call to prayer coming in a sonorous voice that rang clear through the dawn. It was a joy to listen to. Before then, I had heard no call to prayer so inspiring, nor ever since. The Pentecostal choruses were repeated by the armed robbery accused, as they were referred to in the late afternoon every day. It was amazing how the armed robbers were able to observe a strict code of conduct even within their cells, where they stayed virtually day in and day out, not being allowed to leave the block at any time and being allowed to have limited exercises such as jumping on the spot only occasionally. And yet, from what we learned, it was possible for an occupant of cell 1 to pass an item to a particular occupant of cell 18 at the other end of the block and on the opposite side of the corridor. Sometimes they set up a rope or twine tied to the window burglary, proofing at intervals. Along this twine, they strung a plastic or metal drinking cup containing the substance to be passed on. As the cup was swung and it came to each cell window, the inmates in that cell would swing it along on the twine until it got to the desired cell, or to one opposite the desired cell if this was as the other side of the corridor. It was then taken in and passed across the corridor. The cup returned via would have been difficult to exact any reprisal for these lapses. It only goes to prove that there can still be honor among armed robbers. For the next few days after my first night, I was still unable to sleep. I decided I had to consult the doctor. I had never deliberately taken a sleeping pill in all my life. It had never been necessary to do so. On one occasion, I did so inadvertently. Shortly after the Civil War, friends living in Surulere had invited me to a dinner. Since that was my first visit to their house, the husband came down to collect me from Ekueme in his car. I had had a very hectic day. As we were having pre-dinner drinks, I complained of a slight headache. The wife, who was a very experienced nurse, gave me 2 tablets of a tablet called Spasmodolorian, I believe, which I swallowed with my drink. I had assumed it was one of the common headache tablets available in any patient medicine store. Within the next 15 minutes, dinner was served. Halfway through dinner, I found I was unable to keep my eyes open and said so. I was actually frightened. I was then offered a hot cup of coffee, which I gulped down to no avail. I took leave of my host and decided to go back to the sitting room. As I stood up and tried to walk away, my legs gave way and I almost fell, but for the timely intervention of my host, who stretched out a supporting hand. The dinner ended in a fiasco as I asked to be taken home at once. Throughout the night, I battled with sleep. I did not want to close my eyes as I was not sure I would be able to open them afterwards. This half-sleeping, half-walking tango continued until the following evening when I was fully recovered. Such was my only experience with two tablets that I understood later had a very, very small barbiturate content. No doubt the mixture with alcohol might have had a heightening effect, but it was generally accepted that my sleep threshold was very low. Therefore, to go on for 3 or 4 days with an average of only 3 to 4 hours of unsound sleep was a serious development for me. The doctor took my blood pressure and it registered 140/95 from a previous high of 120/80 and a typical 110/75. He prescribed Valium, which he asked me to take at bedtime every night. While he was attending to me, he raised the question of how our government had allowed medical services to be run down. I tried to point out to him that under the prevailing arrangements, the federal government was responsible for only teaching and specialist hospitals, while the states were responsible for health services generally. That many of the teaching hospitals, which should be providing specialist or referral services, were very much stretched because in many states they are turned out to be the only reliable medical institution and were therefore serving the functions of general hospitals for which they were not designed, and with consequent deterioration in the specialist services which they were set up to provide. I expected an objective discussion of the issues I had raised, but instead his reaction was that the federal government and I were trying to shirk our responsibilities and pass the buck to the state governments. He concluded that we, the federal government, must accept responsibility for the deterioration in the standards of medical services in hospitals, and for our hospitals being reduced, in the words of Sani Abacha, to mere consulting clinics. There was no doubt that he welcomed the coup and expected a dramatic improvement in the standard of medical services in the country. His disposition to the change of government was such that he could not resist needling at me. I liked the young man, but I was somewhat sorry for him. It was an irony of fate that not only did medical doctors later have a head-on collision with the Buhari regime, as a result of which several of their leaders joined us in detention while others went into exile, but even though the young prisons doctor, for entirely different reasons, also ended up in detention for several months.